This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn off your camera. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearing sessions, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, so time to resume and continue with today's topics. I won't go through all the usual housekeeping arrangements. I believe, looking at participant lists, everybody here has certainly attended previous sessions, either in person or electronically. So I won't go through all of the usual introductions, but I will just ask Charlotte, the Programme Officer, very quickly if there's any matters arising, and likewise for the council before we get going with this afternoon's topic.
No, just apart from someone now not attending this afternoon, but I think I've sent a revised participant list on that basis. So
yeah, okay. And from the council, any housekeeping matters before we get going?
No, nothing from us. Thank you very much, sir.
No, okay, thank you. So jump slightly back a bit in the sort of in the way that this session's been arranged, insofar as we're now looking at accommodation for gypsies and travellers, and I know that we then go back to the housing allocations, but this was all to do with the sort of availability of individuals, really. This was matter 8, meeting housing needs, which we talked about last week. And issue 11 is accommodation for gypsy and travellers. So this was the outstanding issue as part of that matter, which we'll now come on to discuss. So again, there's no agenda, so we'll go through the matters, issues and questions. I know that there's participants here with comments and representations, and I've read the various reps and hearing statements. So as a starting point then, is the assessment of future needs in the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment, so that's the GTAA, which may be referred to, is that accurate, robust and up to date? And then the second part of that question, really, which is question 2, is what are the accommodation needs and how have they been established? And I think the background to this is set out in the supporting text to the local plan. And the GTAA, I believe, covered a slightly shorter period than the plan period, I think by 1 year. And I think that identified as a need for 32 pitches between 2017 and 2037. And then to account for the plan period, the council, I think you've added on a further single pitch to account for that extra year, I believe, which gets you to your sort of overall need figure across the plan period then. So is that correct? So it's 33 pitches is the number of pitches that are needed over the plan period. Is that right?
That's exactly right, sir. And the reason for adding the sort of the 1 pitch is we took the sort of the need for the sort of the later part of the plan period, recognising that in the first year there was a sort of an element of, if you like, backlog to accommodate. So that's part of, but for the remainder of the plan period, it seemed reasonable to extend it by, essentially, you'll see it works out at roughly one pitch a year. So hence the additional 1 pitch.
Any comments, observations, queries, just with regard to the methodology and how the actual need figure has been arrived at? I know there's some questions about sites, but just in terms of the actual need figure, any comments or representations on that point, on the 33 pitches? point. Yeah, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, sir. We did say in our representations that we felt that the study, although it's a 2018 study, was actually, the survey was conducted back in 2017. So about 5 years ago, which does seem quite a long time ago, as an evidence base to rely on in terms of determining what the need is. And one of the things we did note as well in the study was about the important sort of recommendation was about next steps for the council was to look very carefully at local authority owned sites, public sector owned sites. However, from what we can tell in the trajectory topic paper, there's only been sort of 3 public sector sites looked at, and perhaps only one of those that was assessed as having potential for additional pitches. So there may have been more supply out there than what was looked at by the council. Thank you.
Ms. Marlowe, any comments just in terms of at this stage, just sort of the date then of the survey, and when this was done, whether or not it still represents up to date, robust information? Yes, sir. And I'm joined by Mr. Vint this afternoon. He'll come back on in terms of the council-owned land. Yes, it was obviously the survey work was before that, but bearing in mind this is essentially based on sort of local families, there's been no sort of real change in the constitution of gypsies and travellers within the borough to suggest any change. And indeed, things have been coming forward pretty well in line with the expectation of need as well through planning applications. So we do feel it is up to date. Mr. Vint, would you like to just deal with that other question?
Good afternoon, Tom Vint, Planning Officer from Tunbridge Wells Borough Council. So with regard to the public owned sites, there are 2 sites within the borough. One is owned by Kent County Council. We assessed that site and the site assessment work for that site is or can be found within Annex 1 of the Council's Housing Supply and Trajectory topic paper. So in our assessment of that site, we found no additional capacity for additional pitches at that site. The other site is Tunbridge Wells Borough Council owned, Cinder Hill Wood in Mattfield. So we identified a capacity of 2 to 3 pitches at that site. And since we undertook that assessment, a planning application and subsequently planning permission has been granted for 3 pitches at that site. We have assessed all sites submitted through the call for sites process, including those for gypsy and traveller pitches. No public land was submitted by the council's property and estates team for gypsy and traveller use, and therefore I believe that we've maximised our assessment in terms of looking at the capacity on public land.
So just to look at this issue then, excuse me. So you've identified the need then. So in terms of meeting that need, what process did you go through in seeking to identify sites? So what did you do? You obviously looked at existing sites. Was this subject to the same sort of call for sites processes as other forms of residential development? What did you do to meet these needs then?
Yes, thank you. So we, within our hearing statement, we note that the gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment suggested that, or advised that the council looked at existing sites within the borough as a priority to meeting the needs identified over the period from 2017 to 2037. So as part of that assessment, as part of meeting the needs on existing sites, the council undertook an assessment of all the existing sites within the borough, in a similar way to the way the council has assessed all sites submitted in the Sheila, as submitted through the call for sites and assessed in the Sheila. So we looked at all the site constraints of each individual site. We assessed whether or not it's in a sensitive landscape location, such as the area of outstanding natural beauty, whether or not there were other constraints such as flood risk or ancient woodland, which would impact on the capacity of the site for additional pitches. And we made an assessment in discussion with other officers of the council and development management of what the likely capacity for those existing sites would be.
So just to clarify then, so the very first stage then was just looking at potential additional capacity on existing sites.
Yes, I think that's right, sir. With one exception, we had one site submitted to us through the call for sites process, which is Greenfield Farm, close to Paddock Wood, and so that was also assessed at that stage.
But in terms of the existing sites, so you obviously looked at constraints, etc. Did you then look at and consider those families that were there? Because obviously you talked a lot about the evidence and how that's obviously based on the existing families and projected need going forward. Then, so presumably you looked at the existing families and who was there and how it would all sort of tie together then for future intensification or expansion.
Yes, sir, we did. The actual site assessments, perhaps we should mention, are set out for each site. The planning assessments are set out in Annex 1 of the housing supply and trajectory topic paper, CD 3.74, and you'll see there's a sort of fairly thorough assessment of each of the sites there. As part of, we did also approach the occupiers of the sites about their interest in expansion, and you'll see we have provided as Appendix 1 to our statement sort of an update of that position, and that's been done over a number of years. Obviously, it's been difficult with COVID, and not absolutely all families want to sort of engage strictly in writing, but as we set out, they were written to at least on one, mostly on two occasions, with follow-up with contact details provided, and you've got the responses to those there in the statement.
And as part of this process then, did that pick up land ownership? So where you've looked at potential enlargements of sites, does that land ownership?
Yes, sir. There was. I should have added that that we did do a land registry search as part of the process, and I say Tom Vint has sort of details of those if we need them. But we did confirm that that there was. Particularly where we're looking at expansion of existing sites, that it was in the same control.
And what did that initial work show you then, in terms of, you looked at existing sites plus obviously the one that's coming through the call for sites exercise? What did that show you in terms of potential capacity then for meeting needs? And I guess the sort of second part of that question is how then did you get to the situation of looking at the strategic site allocations. So presumably, was it a case that you were looking at, you identified needs, looked at existing sites and the one that came in? Presumably it was whether or not the full need over the plan period could be met. And presumably, what situation and what stage did you get into where you sort of took a step back and went, right, okay, these existing ones are not going to fully meet needs. We need to sort of look elsewhere. So what sort of stage in the process did that sort of discussion take place?
Yeah, so I'll just kick off, and Tom Vinter will come in. Yes, you're right. In essence, the work on the looking at the individual sites, and please bear in mind that this has evolved a little in response to what people have said to us, but it did identify that there's, as the GTAA sought, really, that the vast majority of need can be met through, we looked initially at intensification, we also looked at regularisation of, in essence, of unauthorised pitches within sites, and then at the potential for expansion of them, and those processes sort of cumulatively we identified a likelihood of meeting most of the need. As we say, there was then discussion with the occupiers about the sort of the prospect of that, and there were some refinements as a result. As I say, we also looked at the site that had been put forward to us and its capacity, and at that point there was a sort of, we were falling a little short of the overall need, and therefore the most appropriate additional new site, and perhaps there's some merit in having a new site and not relying solely on existing sites in the event there's need from elsewhere. Then Paddock Wood, because of this, its nature as a strategic, as a sustainable settlement, and with the largest growth, was identified as the most appropriate location in which to meet the balance.
And did you, as part of that process, did you look at potential other sites then, or locations for meeting the sort of meeting the difference, if you like, meeting the remaining balance?
I think the other point we would make is that we looked at where the distribution of Gypsy sites around the borough, and there is they are dispersed across the borough and in rural areas as well, but to the extent there is a concentration, it is in sort of the Paddock Wood area, mostly to the north and east, essentially outside of the area of outstanding natural beauty and green belt. But that was a sort of a location where there was clearly a potential demand as well. So it was in essence the sort of considered the most appropriate location. As I say, we hadn't at that point considered specific sites within Paddock Wood, and indeed, as I'm sure have heard, that situation sort of been evolving.
So just remind me then, the Greenfields farm site, so that was a site that came forward as part of the call for sites exercise.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because one of the concerns that's been raised through representation has been about okay, yeah, so you've got the Paddock Wood expansion, and the objectors to the plan have sort of made the same point that you've made, but the other way around, insofar as, well, actually, there's already existing authorised pitches, around Paddock Wood. You've then got the Greenfields Farm site. You've then got suggested additional pitches as part of the strategic site, and that actually, in sort of spatial planning terms, that you're actually sort of putting all of these same types of uses in and around Paddock Wood, and that actually you should have taken a sort of further step backwards and gone, okay, well, is the distribution right? It seems to be, the two new sites are both going to be provided at Paddock Wood. So again, how did you consider whether or not it was appropriate that you've got this new site coming forward and then you've got the strategic site? So are any pitches proposed at Shoedley Village, for example, another strategic site? If not, why not?
Okay, I think, as I've said, the reason you look at the distribution of sites, there are sites across the borough, and the essence of the GTAA is to meet local needs, and therefore it seems entirely appropriate that you meet the needs in the area where most families are. The Greenfield Farm site is, again, a relatively small site, and we've identified that for 3 pitches. And I think the scale of all is, and the need is for sort of small family sites in essence. So where you've got additional pitches, again, they're relatively small numbers. I've said that the need is to the sort of the most sort of sites are to the north and east of Paddock Wood. Shoedley, I suppose, is on the other side. But more particularly, if we're providing, as the PPTS says, in terms of meeting needs in the most sustainable locations, Paddock Wood in that locality would still be the most sustainable location, a town with the widest range of services and facilities, aside from having a greater growth.
And I can go back and look at this in greater detail, but did the GTAA give any commentary on spatial distribution, location, in terms of where these needs would be met and how they're best met?
I don't recall it giving that, but obviously it did identify that there was the distribution of families, and we know that there are a lot of families in that area, and their onus is on meeting sort of local needs. And I think you'd look to generally do that with the sort of disruption to family patterns as you can. So no, the GTAA, I don't recall giving any specific, just check Mr. Vint, but I don't think it gave any specific geographic proposals. It was concerned primarily that the strategy should look to make, in essence, the best use of your existing sites where you can. But I don't think it either ruled out the potential that an additional site may be needed or may be appropriate.
And in terms of the allocation at Paddock Wood then, so which parcel of land at Paddock Wood is, or are the proposed pitches going to be coming forward on? I think it's, are they shown on the master plan on to the western side, on the western parcel?
I think so. It says it's either, I think it left the option open of west or east, but I think Mrs. Young is still here, so she's the expert on that.
Thank you. I'll just clarify. So the policy, as worded for Paddock Wood, it identifies 2 potential locations for the Gypsy and Traveller. So it's part 2 of the policy, part 2F of policy STR-SS1. And it says that it's expected that the provision will be on the western parcel and eastern parcel. We set out in our hearing statement to matter 6, which had a specific question on the Gypsy and Traveller provision that that has since, well, the first and foremost, that the policy sought not to prescribe and kept it flexible, but suggested where it could be appropriate to provide. And those locations were stemmed from consideration of flood risk matters, accessibility to the highway, and sort of landscaping and landscaping considerations. But since this policy was drafted, and we would have sought a modification to that policy regardless, because actually we want the 3 pitches to be in one location, not across 2, and that had not been clarified through the master planning work. So we would seek to have that located in one location. Now, as set out in our hearing statement, and we've obviously had lots of discussion on this, we didn't think it was necessary to prescribe the exact location at the time we drafted submitted the plan, because we were sort of open to that being led from the sort of more detailed master planning process, but we fully take on board your comments since about there being greater certainty with the location of the sort of 2 key areas that we hadn't prescribed in terms of that and the extra care facility. And as you will see in the statement of common ground with Crest Nicholson and their reps to this matter, we are actively discussing a site under Crest Nicholson's control on the western parcel. So a very long answer, but to confirm, we are expecting it to be on the western parcel. So the policy as worded suggested it could be, it didn't fix it. We confirm it will be 1 site, not 2, and it is likely to be on the western parcel.
Yeah, I think the way that 2F is written is, yeah, obviously the 3 pitch traveller site expected to be on the western parcel and eastern parcel. It's just then that sort of confusion as to effectiveness. So certainly would sort of agree with that. Just in terms of the western parcel, are there any flood risk issues then in terms of provision of caravans in that area?
So it's obviously known that there are flood risk issues on the western parcel, but it is considered that there is available land within the western parcel that can accommodate that. It is shown as a location on the structure plan that was considered by David Locke Associates, shown on map 28, and that was considered for the reason, but it would be confirmed that the Gypsy and Traveller provision would be outside the flood zone 3. It would be in accord with the flood risk considerations, and through the master planning work, we are confident that can be achieved on the western parcel. That's what it's demonstrated.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ashton?
Thank you, sir. Really, the reason I'm here this afternoon is because at the moment it does feel like there is some ambiguity about what is proposed and what the policy says relative to what the David Locke document says, and the David Locke document is also cross-referred to in the policy. And I think, as you rightfully point out, for the policy to be effective, it's got to be clear, and at the moment it isn't. And it is therefore of concern to my clients because the suggestion is at the moment that it is both to the east and the west. So personally, I would much prefer some form of clarity through modifications. I think possibly, like Paddock Wood Town Council, I have a view about the level of accommodation that's been sought within Paddock Wood per se, but I'll probably let Mr. Hayes come in on that one. My point really is one of effectiveness of policy and clarity rather than ambiguity, which is what I currently feel that.
Mr. Hayes?
Thank you. I agree with Ms. Ashton on that point, that that there is a lot of ambiguity, and the town council isn't clear either where the new site would be located in terms of the strategic site, but also the overall level of potential new pitches within Paddock Wood. I think is at least 50% of the overall need all going to Paddock Wood. And I think the majority of that, from as far as I can read in the table, I think it's table 11, are being proposed as intensification sites. So it seems like the overall strategy is that the council feels it's best to sort of intensify existing pitch sites for additional pitches, rather than kind of find other locations that might be more suitable across the borough. I did have a quick look at the GTAA, and I don't see any reference to intensification within that. I think it talks mainly about sort of potential to extend sites rather than intensify. And I think there's a lot of concern that trying to fit too many families onto a site by adding additional pitches, we know it's a very sensitive issue and something that needs to be approached very, very carefully from my experience in this area. So I think there's an overall concern about the level and the strategy in terms of how these pitches are actually going to be delivered on these sites. But also there's the point that there has been a number of planning permissions since the GTAA was undertaken. So I believe there was one in 2020 for about 3 additional pitches. So there may be a need to sort of bring the situation up to date to reflect those additional consents.
Okay, any comments from the council? Just on particularly that point about the intensification point and how that's being considered in terms of the sort of practicalities of actually intensifying some of these sites then. And presumably when you said that you obviously looked at land ownership, you'd obviously sort of written to people, gone out there and sort of spoken to people. So presumably then this sort of issue or plan of intensification, is that something that was sort of discussed with existing families and existing site owners? Is that something that obviously they're aware that that's what the plan's seeking to do rather than just extend sites?
Yeah, yes, of course, sir. It is indeed. I can't remember the actual wording of the GTAA. I certainly talked about regularisation of caravans, and it certainly looked. It said, focus on existing sites. I can't remember the actual wording. So when it comes to intensification, and there aren't many of these, as you'll see, but there are some opportunities which have certainly been discussed with the occupiers, and indeed in most cases I think they're ones that they've sort of that they've put forward, but rather than we've identified, but certainly where they do exist, they have been agreed. Yes, because you have to be clear that there is the capacity within the site. I think that was, there's nothing else you wanted to add to that, was there, Tom?
Okay, sorry, Ms. Marlow, was a colleague of yours wanting to add something?
No, sorry, sir. No, I don't think so. I think there's other points covered. That was just the emphasis was on existing sites, and obviously, we've looked at expansion where it has been considered suitable.
Okay, so in terms of the plan, then obviously you've identified needs, you've looked at various different sites, we've talked about the Paddock Wood sort of strategic site and some changes there to just make that abundantly clear and effective. One of the questions I asked was, is it sufficiently clear then to users of the plan which sites are actually allocated or identified for, be it extension, intensification? Do you think that the plan's sufficiently clear in that regard? Are people aware as to what these sites are and what they'll be used for?
Yes, I think so, sir. That they are all sort of identified within the main body of the plan itself, and the tables, directly above and linked to the policy. And I think more particularly, as we move forward, and the interactive policies map will be the key reference. That these are all shown very clearly on the policies map, and indeed they're if it is an extension, that's highlighted as well. So I think it is clear. Yes, there is one point about the policy I'd like to come on to, but I don't know if you want to about the criteria, but happy to come back to that.
Well, yeah, we'll touch upon that in a minute. So just looking at the policy itself then, so it's policy H9, to meet the accommodation needs for Gypsy travellers over the plan period, proposals for additional pitches as identified in table 11, as shown on the relevant inset maps of the policies maps, and on site layout plans showing potential areas for additional pitches in Appendix 5, will be permitted subject to providing the highlighted site-specific mitigations. And we'll come on to that point. So I think that's maybe where you were going with it. I know that you've sort of picked that up in the hearing statement. Appendix 5 then. Appendix 5 includes these sites. If we go to Appendix 5 of the local plan, it sort of sets these out. What's the two questions to this? Firstly, what's the justification for setting this out in Appendix 5 as opposed to, say, having the sites actually in the main body of the plan as you would do for residential sites? And is it the requirement then that development proposals should come forward in accordance with the indicative or with the plans shown in Appendix 5? Obviously, it's got areas for expansion, areas for intensification. Are you expecting plan applications to come forward in accordance with these plans in Appendix 5?
I think so. It is slightly anomalous, so I'd agree. And I think the reason for that is that these sites weren't included at the draft plan stage. So we look to have the detailed plans within the main body of the local plan, as well as having the supporting topic paper, and to be clear exactly what was involved, whether it was expansion, intensification, in other words, additional caravans within the same permitted site, or the acceptance of an unauthorised pitch. We thought it was clear, wanted to be clear just what was proposed, so people understood it and therefore were able to respond accordingly. And this is, in a sense, why they're sort of they're dealt with in policy H9. I think.
So when you say they weren't in the draft plans, they weren't in the plan at Reg 18 stage.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So the work was going on at that stage with the occupiers and through the GTA work. Through the annual review of the caravan count with officers to actually assess all the sites. So you asked the question also about whether, I was just going on to say about whether you expect proposals to come forward in line with these. I think in essence, the actual inset maps within the local plan reflect what is said here. So I don't think there should be any anomaly, although these plans give a slightly bigger, at a larger scale, and identify whether it's expansion or regularization. If I look at if I just double check, the key to the inset maps combines intensification and regularization as opposed to an expansion. So, and to be honest, I think within a site, whether it's regularization or intensification, from a planning point of view, perhaps doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the key is those sites that are either you've got an existing site and there's an intensification of the use, as opposed to the sites where there's a clear extension to yeah. I think what H9 needs to do is, if you're relying upon these plans at Appendix 5, I think the policy could just be tweaked slightly to just be abundantly clear that these are in effect your allocated sites, aren't they? You've identified a need, and then you've identified various sites which will help ensure that those needs are met. So I think the policy could just be worded slightly differently to just make it abundantly clear that these are the sites, and the various inset maps show whether or not it's a case of intensification or whether it's extension. So I think it's just again just having a sort of sit down and having a look at that and making it abundantly clear for effectiveness, you know, that these sites are, well, they're in effect allocated, aren't they, to help meet your needs over the plan period.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think the sites need to be pulled into the policy itself.
So can I just clarify, the actual policies map does distinguish between where you have an extension and where it's within the existing permitted site. So the key distinction is made on the policies map. I'm just a little, we don't, these plans are equivalent to the site layout plans in a sense within for each of the allocations. We don't at the moment refer to the layout plans in the actual policies themselves. So I do myself wonder whether the policies map in itself is sufficient, and that was the view that we'd originally took.
So the policies map has got H9 sites shown as red, and it's also got some H9 sites shown as green. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
So is that the distinction then
between green where there's an expansion of an existing site with permission, of course?
I think what would be easiest, and mindful that again these are sites that are going to meet your needs, and thinking out loud, it might be easier just for the policy to say these are the sites as shown on the policies map where there'll be a regularization or intensification of use, you know, list bullet points these sites, and then these are the sites, either new sites or sites where there'll be an extension, and again to the bullet point ... and then you've got a policy. So readers of the plan, they can pick it up, they go to policy H9, Gypsy and traveller provision, right, great, okay, yeah, I know exactly what the sites are, right, they're two new sites, their intensification, their extension, brilliant, okay, I know what's going on there, and then you can keep your Appendix 5, and then you could cross-refer to Appendix 5 and say, you know, indicative or illustrative details are provided in Appendix 5 to the plan. And then it's pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we have any problem with that, sir, at all.
Very good.
And then where's it gone? I keep losing the policy. And And then the second part of this, which I think maybe you were going to come on to, is the final part, which says that essentially, obviously, these developments will be permitted, subject to providing the highlighted site-specific mitigations. So again, what was the highlighted site-specific mitigations? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Mr. Marlow.
Sorry. Yes, sir. The mitigations were those set out in the assessments of the sites within the topic paper. So I referred you to Annex 1, and in the assessment of those sites, a number of sites refer to the need, for instance, perhaps most typically for screening. So those were the mitigations. But again, it's perhaps a remnant of sort of the consultation stage. We've essentially set out in the statement, we agree that reference should be omitted. In effect, those issues are all covered by the criteria of the policy.
I was on mute myself. Yeah, it goes back to the issue about requiring compliance with something that's in a non-development plan document. And I think it falls into that category of if you've got something that's clearly sort of critical and site specific, you know, they've got sites allocated, but something needs to happen, should be in the policy. But probably agree in this instance, if it's just more generic things about screening, landscaping, appropriate access points.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you've probably got enough within your bullet points 1 to 7 there that, you know, would require a consideration of those issues anyway. So I think you're right in that instance. Mindful that obviously we talked about a couple of changes to the policy there. Just anybody, any comments or observations at this stage just on what they've heard so far? No.
So okay. If I may, there was I think Mr. Hayes.
Sorry, Mr. Hayes,
Hayes raised a point previously, which I was going to address. You may have raised it yourself in terms of exceptional circumstances. If I can, Mr. Hayes, and if you've got another point, obviously we'll come back to it. But I think I think it's Mr. Hayes raised the question: what are exceptional circumstances? And obviously, in short, again, this was to. It's a bit of a hangover from the consultation. In essence, it was saying that we expect this is where locations, this is where we expect pitches to be. But if they're elsewhere, then which they could be, these would be the criteria. The words, I think, the council, on reflection, don't think the words "in exceptional circumstances" are necessary. In essence, it is simply a case that other proposals for Gypsy and Traveller pitches will be permitted by all of the above criteria. And I think we'd look to add and other relevant policies within the plan are met. I don't think it needs the exceptional circumstances. In essence, we have a policy with sites and with criteria, and other sites can meet those criteria. The only reason for adding and other relevant policies is because those criteria in large part relate to sites which have already been identified. So for instance, it doesn't cover things like whether the access is adequate or appropriate. So I think if we just added a cross-reference to other relevant policies as well, that would cover it. And we don't need the expression "in exceptional circumstances." It's a criteria-based policy.
In terms of windfall proposals, then I think you're right, and I picked that up as well. And I think that there needs to be also consideration here that that there's no sort of undue added layer of restriction for sort of Gypsy and Traveller provision that isn't there for settled community provision in terms of housing. But just on that then, so, and again, this goes right back to the strategy day where we talked about the sort of overarching policy of I think STR1 this issue about limits to built development, and it's been clear as to what's permitted where. So if you had a proposal for Egyptian Traveller's site then that was within the limits to built development, then presumably as per sort of normal settled community housing, that the sort of in principle support would be there. It would be within limits to built developments within existing settlements. What then if you had a proposal that was outside of a limits to built development, so not in the green belt but just in a countryside location?
In essence, it would be considered against the criteria of the policy. We would also have regard to the 5-year land supply position if it wasn't in the area of outstanding natural beauty. I seem to recall that doesn't impact on sites within the AONB, but otherwise it would be part of the supply position, would be part of the consideration, but otherwise it would be considered against those criteria, and as I say, and other relevant policies of the plan.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you're right. I think the sort of phrase "in exceptional circumstances," I think that's the key there, and yeah, that's not justified for sort of windfall proposals to sort of somehow meet some exceptional circumstances in that regard. So yeah, I agree with that. Mr. Hayes.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wanted to make the point on the policy H9, which comes back to the intensification point in terms of clause 1 of H9, where it talks about the density of pitch provision within the application site should be maximized. And I think that reads to me, intensification. And just coming back to my previous point, I don't think that's appropriate. And the council, I think, has been quite careful about other developments, sort of market housing, ensuring that they aren't overly developed or too high a density. So I don't think that there should be an exception for Gypsy and Traveller sites on that point. The other point I wanted to raise, which I did a minute ago, was about the Mile Oak Road planning consents that have already been given back in 2020. So I think there's 3 pitches there, and there may have been other consents as well. And the town council was really keen to understand what the council's updated position was on that, and reflect that within the plan, potentially through modifications. And one final point was a question, I don't know, you may be coming on to it as well, sir, was about transit site or temporary stopping place, which I don't see it in the plan at the moment. Wasn't aware of the GTAA sort of suggesting that there's a need for it, but I do think that the council has been in touch with Paddock Wood Town Council about the potential need for a transit site, and there has, just to give you some sort of local sort of experience, I think over the summer there's been the use of there's been considerable damage of the Paddock Wood Football Club grounds, where the pitches where they had to clear them of large amounts of rubbish and repair the pitches, etc. And the town council needs to, it's their sort of job to take care of that and repair the pitch, which obviously comes with financial sort of consequences as well. So it's really, and we understand that a transit or temporary stopping place might be a kind of cross-boundary issue as well with other local authorities. So town council is quite keen to understand today what the position is regarding a transit site or a temporary stopping place. Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of points there, but first taking the first point then about the permission that was granted in 2020, Mr. Hayes. So was your suggestion then that this was a site that's come forward as being granted planning permission and would be contributing towards meeting needs, therefore reducing the requirement for other sites? Is that, have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I believe it's in table 11 under Mile Oak Stables. It says there's 5 existing, 4 outstanding permissions, and 0 potential. So it's kind of, the town council just is unclear, because there may be some other permissions that were granted as well, and it was really trying to get an up-to-date position on where those consents are and how, you know, where do they fit into these potential sites. I think the town council was concerned that they were, you know, getting more pitches than they should be in terms of what have actually been delivered or consented to date.
So the Mile Oak Stables is a site that's identified. It's on the policies map, I believe. And it's listed in table 11 in the plan, Mile Oak Stables. So existing authorised pitches 5, outstanding permission for 4, and it's got a figure of potential additional pitches of 0. So, Mr. Marlowe, just talk me through then. So, Mile Oak Stables then. So, where you've got a site there that says potential additional pitches of none. What's its sort of purpose, if you like, within the local plan?
I think so. The point here is it's a question of identifying where the additional pitches, which don't exist at the moment, will come from. So the table identifies those permissions as well as those without permission. So as has been said, there were 4 pitches approved. We include an update in our Appendix 1 to the hearing statement to say that one of those pitches is actually now being built, and the permission for the remaining 3 pitches is essentially a live permission.
So as far as the local plan's concerned then, so Mile Oak Stables, Paddock Wood, it's a site that's allocated in essence, and we talked about reordering the policy to list these sites. It's a site that's allocated. It's identified within the Appendix 5 as having a potential area for intensification. Presumably then, and this is map 87 in the local plan, so presumably then the map 87 in the local plan where it says area for intensification, does that reflect the planning permission then, presumably?
Mr. Vince nodding at me. So yes, sir, it is.
Okay. So this is in essence then it's a site. It's allocated in the plan. It's got a red line. It's got an area identified for intensification. It's got planning permission, and essentially what the plan is saying is that there's no further. The plan doesn't infer any further sort of intensification over and above that which is already approved, I think is where I'm getting to. Yeah.
Absolutely correct, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Hayes, does that make sense? I think it does just about in my head now. It's been explained, and again, it could probably just be made a little bit clearer.
I think it does make sense. I think the town council is really, you know, they were confused by the policy and the maps as well. So it's kind of trying to get some sort of greater understanding and appreciation of what the policy and maps are trying to do. So I think it is clear.
Yeah, I think through modification it can be made clear, and then there's no concerns then that it's identified site. It's in essence already got planning permission in that regard. So that was the sort of the first point I think that Mr. Hayes made. Was there anything else you wanted to come back on, Mr. Marlowe?
Well, he asked about transit provision, and no, there is no transit provision proposed at Paddock Wood. In fact, the GTAA didn't identify any need for transit provision, and nothing's really happened. There has been the occasional unauthorised encampment, but these operate at a low level. We're not on sort of a principal route, which happens more to the east of the county. But nevertheless, there is sort of ongoing discussions, as has been referred to with other Kent councils on this. But there's no particular specific need in the borough to look at it. So there's no provision within the plan. It's something that we'll keep under review, particularly in relation to unauthorised encampments that happen.
If you did get any proposals for this temporary sort of stopping areas, anything like that, where would you go to consider those?
I think to a large extent the criteria of policy H9 would be applicable, obviously in a sort of slightly different context. It very much depends on the nature of the proposal, I suppose. That there's quite a difference between a managed transit site, which I've dealt with in the past, and sort of perhaps a tolerated site. But I think that, in essence, the criteria of H9 would be largely applicable. But I think there's be a question of looking at it in the context of the policies as the plan as a whole.
And just in terms of the other point Mr. Hazer made about densities, so density of pitch provision within the site is maximised having regard to minimum separation distances between mobile homes, caravans, etc., as required by any relevant legislation or guidance. So again, just what are you sort of envisaging there? And again, is it inherently different to what you are seeking from a sort of bricks and mortar housing?
Yeah, we've obviously been challenged on optimising the use of land. Obviously, these are brownfield sites, often in sensitive locations, and it seems entirely appropriate to make effective use of the land within it for pitches. I don't think the word maximise is meant to suggest any difference of approach. It's not suggesting that it's crammed in with no amenity space. Those are all factors that are set out in the policies. And I should have perhaps mentioned in relation to your previous point about the PPTS as well, providing a framework. So no, it's not meant to be any different than our approach to optimising the use of sites, but obviously aware that they can be quite caravans can be intrusive in a rural context.
Yeah, we talked about policy H2 for housing density, and we talked about potentially changing that policy to slightly change the emphasis, which would actually be more in line really with what's being proposed here. I don't often like changing policies for the sort of sake of it, but do you think it needs to reference things like the landscape character you mentioned there as a sort of key consideration, or do you think that there's enough? Obviously, the second bullet point's all about landscape characters. Do you think there's enough there to make it clear that yes, okay, might get the application coming forward, it's too crammed in, it's too much of a high density, it's harmful to landscape character, that there'd be sufficient there for the council to say no, that's the wrong density for that site? You happy with that?
We can simply say that the requirement to maximise, or we could say actually optimise instead of maximise, because of the connotations of maximise. Having regard to the minimum separation distance between mobile homes, and indicate in number 1 that it must also be subject to fulfilling the criteria of points 2 to 7.
I think so. I think yes. We would take the view that So I'm just getting some feedback internally. I think, the harm to land's character and appearance of the landscape does sufficiently cover the issues, and obviously will be read in conjunction with AONB policy and the like as well. So I think the landscape issues, which can be, as I'm sure you're aware, probably the biggest issue when it comes to such proposals in the countryside, is sufficiently covered.
Yeah, this comes back to is the requirement here, and now we really get into detail of policy. Is the requirement here that a development would meet every single criteria? Just looking at it, so is there there's no sort of, or is there an and at the end?
The introduction to the policy says meeting all the criteria as applicable. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Yeah. I think set the point as Mr. Hayes has made. I think it's probably just the emphasis of the words rather than anything else. But we can leave it in your hands to have a think and have a look at that in terms of effectiveness. So we've looked at sort of some of these sites and sort of supply. So in question 6, I asked about whether or not the council can identify a supply of specific deliverable sites then sufficient to provide 5 years worth against the identified requirement. And I think you said that it could you currently identifying about 4.4 years, is that right, worth of supply?
That's correct, sir. That's 4.4 years as at 1st of October 2021, but that doesn't include any of the sites in the as we had the same discussion in relation to housing land supply generally. It doesn't include sites identified in H9 that don't have an existing permission, and there is most definitely interest in bringing those forward, such that hence our confidence in concluding that we will have a 5-year supply, if not this year, certainly on adoption of the plan.
So sorry, just my note then. So it doesn't include, presumably it doesn't include the Paddock Wood and the other allocation, the new allocation, the name of which has just escaped me.
Greenfield Farm.
Greenfield Farm. So it doesn't include those two.
It doesn't.
Right.
No.
Okay. And in terms of the Paddock Wood strategic site, then how would this be delivered? Do you think? Obviously, we heard this morning a lot about sort of phasing and sort of selling plots and parcels to developers, etc. So, in terms of the strategic site, how would the new pitches there be provided, or by whom, or would the parcel just be sold on at an early stage? How would it work?
I'll ask Mrs. Young to come in, but just generally speaking, certainly in my experience and looking at the GTA as well, most families are looking for their own site, which they control. So I'm imagining that it would be sold to a traveller family, and I think that's Mrs. Young's presumption as well.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of its sort of location integration as part of a wider design, yeah, it'd be picked up in the master planning, but otherwise, then it would just be parcel of land identified and sold off. Yeah. Okay. Question 7 was about the site-specific mitigations and the purposes of the policy, which we've already talked about. That we've talked about modifications to delete that. We've also talked about how the council would consider windfall development proposals, which was question 8. And we again have talked about deleting reference to the exceptional circumstances and some other changes to the policies about just making it abundantly clear which sites are allocated and for what purpose. Which brings me to the sort of end of my questions that I had about the specific sites, but there's still others here. So Ms. Ashton or Mr. Hayes, do you have any other sort of comments or observations or representations you want to make, either in regard to the policy or the sites that are proposed for allocation? No.
No, I think we've covered everything. Thank you.
Yeah, covered everything. Anything else further from the council on that matter?
No, sir. Thank you very much. Unless, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, well, that brings us to an early finish for today. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Charlotte, if you're still there, any questions about tomorrow's session? Everyone's got their links and happy that everyone's knows where they need to be and what they need to be doing. So it's another sort of 9:30 start. Again, going back to looking at the site allocations, I think we were looking at Cranbrook and Sissinghurst in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody should have their links. Yeah,
everyone's got their links.
Everything should be fine. Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, well, unless there's anything else, thank you all for your time this afternoon, and we'll adjourn for the day and then resume back again for a 9:30 start tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.